Story 1. The fire lookout's last shift. At 3:47 in the morning, something hit the base of my tower so hard the entire structure shook. Not wind, not a branch. Something with weight and intention. The radio had gone silent 60 seconds before that, and when it crackled back on at 3:48, the voice on the other end recited the last 4 sentences I'd spoken word for word in my own voice, and then asked me, very calmly, to come down. I did not come down. I want to start by telling you that I am not someone who scares easily. I say that not to impress you, but because it matters for what follows. I spent 2 seasons as a fire lookout in Gifford Pinchot National Forest in Washington State, and the first season taught me that isolation and darkness and strange sounds in the timber are just part of the job. You learn to sort the real from the imagined. You learn what wind does to old wood, what elk sound like moving through brush at 2 in the morning, what a dead snag sounds like when it finally lets go and crashes through the canopy below. By my second season, starting in June of the year I'm about to describe, I thought I had a complete catalog of everything that forest could throw at me. I was missing one entry. My tower was the Sunrise Peak Lookout, a standard 60-foot cab-on-ground structure set at 4,800 feet on a ridge above the Lewis River drainage. The cab at the top was 14 feet by 14 feet, 4 walls of windows, a small wood stove, a cot, a propane cooktop, a firefinder map table bolted to the center of the floor, and a radio that I was required to check in on every 2 hours from 0600 to 2200, and then once more at 0200 for the overnight safety check. The protocol was simple. I'd key the radio, give my identifier and a weather and visibility report, and the dispatcher at Station 7 on the other end would acknowledge and log it. I had done this approximately 240 times across my 2 seasons without incident. That September, the fire season was winding down but not done. The previous week had brought a lightning complex to the south end of the district that kept everyone nervous, and the forest supervisor had extended tower staffing 2 weeks past the normal rotation end. I didn't mind. I had nowhere particular to be. My replacement wasn't due until the 14th, and it was currently the night between the 10th and the 11th. The weather that evening had been building since mid-afternoon. Not a fire weather pattern, a marine push coming in from the coast, dropping temperatures and bringing the humidity up. By 8 p.m., it was spitting rain against the cab windows, light and intermittent. By 10, it was steady. By midnight, it was a proper Pacific Northwest rain, the kind that comes in sheets and makes the whole forest smell like wet copper and pine resin. Visibility dropped to about a quarter mile. The distant ridgeline lights that I used as orientation points disappeared into the overcast. This is fine, I told myself. Rain means fire danger drops to near zero. This is the easy night. I did my 2200 check-in without issue. Dispatch acknowledged, logged it, wished me a quiet night. I made coffee on the propane burner and settled in to wait for the 0200 check. There was nothing to do but read and listen to the rain and watch the windows fog slightly at the edges from the warmth of the stove. At approximately midnight 30, I heard the first thing that didn't fit. It was a sound from directly below the tower, not from the surrounding timber, but from the ground immediately underneath the structure. A rhythmic impact, slow and deliberate, like something heavy setting its weight down one step at a time on the wet gravel around the tower base. I leaned over and looked down through the floor hatch window. My headlamp beam cut down through the rain and lit the gravel apron around the base. Nothing there. The sound had stopped the moment I'd moved to look. I stayed at the window for 3 minutes, rain drumming on the cab roof, light sweeping the ground below, gravel, wet grass at the edges, the base of the tower legs, nothing else. I fouled it under wind-shifted debris and went back to my chair. At 1:15, I noticed the tracks. I hadn't seen them before, because I'd only been looking straight down. When I swept my headlamp at a wider angle across the gravel apron, I could see them clearly, indentations pressed into the wet gravel in a circular pattern around the tower base. They were large, spaced far apart, and they were bipedal, which I could tell because the pattern was 2-point, not 4, and the stride length between each impression was close to 5 feet. Whatever made them had been circling the tower in a slow, deliberate loop. The impressions were filling with rainwater. They'd been made while I was watching the window or just before. I am a practical person. I thought, a person. Some lost hiker, some ranger on foot patrol, some local who knows these woods. I keyed the radio and called Station 7, which was 40 minutes ahead of my scheduled 0200 check. I reported what I'd seen, described the tracks, asked if any personnel were operating in my immediate area that night. The dispatcher, a woman named Paula, who I had spoken to dozens of times, said no. No foot patrols in my sector, no personnel within 3 miles of my position. She asked if I wanted her to log it as an incident report, and I said yes. She said she'd note it and that I should radio in immediately if I observed anything further. I thanked her and signed off. The next sound came at 1:52. It started at the base of the stairs. My tower stairs are a standard switchback metal staircase, open frame, attached to the outside of the structure, running from ground level to the cab deck. In the rain, metal stairs have a very specific sound. When weight is applied, a dull, slightly resonant clank that travels up the structure. I know this sound intimately. I've listened to it every time I've climbed those stairs for 2 seasons. What I heard at 1:52 was that sound. One step, a pause, then another, then a third. Something was coming up my stairs. I will tell you plainly that my heart rate jumped in a way it had not jumped in a long time. There is a difference between intellectual acknowledgement of an odd situation and the body's response to something climbing toward you in the dark and the rain. My body responded appropriately. I crossed to the cab door, through the interior bolt, and went to the south window to try to get a sight line down the staircase. The rain was heavy enough, and the angle was difficult enough that I couldn't see the lower staircase landings clearly. My headlamp beam caught the railing, the open frame steps, the rain coming down through the structure in thin silver lines. The footsteps had stopped. I held the light steady and watched for 2 full minutes. Nothing moved on the stairs that I could see. The rain continued. The tower groaned slightly in a gust. Then, from somewhere below the cab deck level, something spoke. It didn't shout. It didn't whisper. It spoke at normal conversational volume, and the rain should have swallowed it, but it carried up to me as clearly as if the speaker were standing in the cab beside me. It said my name, not my title, not hey or hello. My actual first name, which is not posted anywhere on or near this tower, which I had not used on any radio transmission, which was not on any signage in the area. My name, spoken in a tone that was almost gentle, like someone trying to wake a sleeping person without startling them. I did not respond. I stepped back from the window and stood very still in the center of the cab. At 2:02, exactly on schedule, I forced myself to key the radio for my standard check-in. My voice was steady. I gave my identifier, my weather report, my visibility update. I reported that I was secure in the cab and that the earlier ground-level activity had not been resolved, and I asked again whether any personnel were in my area. Paula at Station 7 acknowledged the report and confirmed again, no personnel within 3 miles. Then she asked if I was all right. I said yes. And then the radio produced a second voice. It was not Paula's. It came out of my receiver clearly, at the same volume and the same slight crackle of the transmission quality, and it said everything I had just said. My identifier, my weather report, my visibility update, my request about personnel, my statement that I was secure, all of it played back to me in my own voice, with a precision that a recording device could not have improved on. And then it said, still in my voice, "Come down now." I sat there in the cab with the radio handset in my hand and the rain on the windows, and I did not move for a long time. I keyed the handset and said, very quietly, "Paula, did you just transmit back to me?" Paula said, "No, I heard that though. That was your voice. What is happening up there?" I said I didn't know. She said she was logging an incident and alerting the duty ranger, and that I should stay in the cab, stay off the radio unless there was an emergency, and that someone would be at my position before dawn. She sounded calm, but I could hear the particular careful quality of someone who was keeping their voice steady on purpose. I said, "Copy that." I put the handset down. At 2:17, the tower shook. I've described this already, the impact at the base, single and massive, like something that weighed several hundred pounds had struck one of the tower legs with full force. The stove rattled. My coffee mug slid 6 inches across the map table. The windows flexed in their frames. Then silence. Rain. The creak of the structure settling. I went to each of the 4 windows in sequence, pressing close to the glass and aiming my headlamp down at every angle I could manage. The beam caught gravel, the lower staircase framing, the guy wires, the tree line 20 feet back from the tower base. On the 3rd window, the north-facing one, my light caught something standing at the edge of the gravel apron, just at the boundary where the ground cover began. It was tall. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds and I've tried to be precise about everything else, so I'll be precise about this too. It was taller than any person I have ever seen in person. When I say tall, I mean that its head, which I could see clearly in my headlamp beam, was level with the bottom landing of my staircase. The bottom landing is 12 feet off the ground. It was not wearing rain gear. It was not wearing anything that I could identify with certainty in the beam of a headlamp from 60 feet up in heavy rain. What I could see clearly was the outline, the shoulders, which were not proportioned correctly for the height, too narrow and too sloped, and the head, which was tilted slightly upward, and the eyes caught my light and held it. Not reflected it in the way an animal's eyes reflect a flashlight, held it, like the light was landing on something and stopping there. It was looking directly at me. I did not move. I think what I felt in that moment was something past fear, something more fundamental. The recognition that the thing you are looking at does not belong in the category of things you have prepared for. Then it spoke again, my name, the same tone as before. And then, "You don't have to be afraid. I'm not going to hurt you. I just want you to come down." The voice was mine. Not similar to mine, not a distorted or corrupted version of mine. My voice, produced by something standing 12 feet below a staircase, landing in the rain, which had never been in the same room as me. I stepped back from the window. I thought about the generator. The tower had a small propane-fed generator in the equipment locker under the cab deck, which I used sparingly, mainly to charge equipment when solar wasn't sufficient. It fed a set of 4 high-output work lights mounted on the cab exterior corners, pointing outward and down, designed for use during nighttime smoke investigations. Those lights together put out approximately 8,000 lumens aimed at the ground around the tower base. I opened the locker access panel in the cab floor and started the generator. The lights came on all at once, 4 corners, 8,000 lumens, flooding the entire gravel apron and the tree line in white light. The figure was gone. I stood there with the hatch open, generator running, all 4 lights blazing, and there was nothing on the gravel apron, and nothing at the tree line, and nothing on the stairs. Just rain and gravel and light and the smell of wet pine. But here is the thing I have not been able to explain in the 2 years since this happened. The tracks were still there. The circular impressions in the gravel, the ones I'd seen at 1:15, the ones that were filling with rainwater, they were still there. All of them. And there was a new set, pressed deeper, leading from the north tree line to directly beneath the north corner of the tower. And then nothing. No outgoing tracks. No path leading away. Whatever had been standing there had not walked away. I left the generator running and the lights on for the rest of the night. I sat in the center of the cab with my back to the firefinder table, facing the door, and I waited. Nothing else happened. The duty ranger, a man named Walt Gerber, arrived at 5:50 a.m. in a district truck. He climbed the stairs, knocked, called my name, and I let him in. He looked at my face and didn't ask a lot of questions. He went back down and walked the gravel apron carefully, photographed the tracks on his department phone, and came back up. He said he didn't know what made them. He filed an incident report. I later obtained a copy through the forest supervisor's office, which listed the track evidence, the radio anomaly as reported by the Station 7 dispatcher, and the visual observation of an unidentified figure. The report was designated under the category of unconfirmed wildlife activity, which is the category they use when they don't have another category. I was transferred to a different tower for the remaining 4 days of the season at my own request. I didn't go back to Sunrise Peak. I have gone back and thought about every detail of that night more times than I can count. The voice, the tracks, the thing standing at my tree line that was not an animal and was not a person and was not anything I had a name for. The way it used my voice as casually as borrowing a coat. I don't have a clean explanation. I have what I heard and what I saw and the incident report number, which is DRF-947-SE, filed with the Gifford Pinchot National Forest Supervisor's Office. What I will tell you is this: if you work alone in a remote tower and your radio starts producing your own voice back at you, do not transmit again. Do not let it hear you. Turn off the radio, start every light you have, and wait for dawn. Whatever it is that does this, it seems to need your voice. The less of it you give, the less it has to work with. I don't know why it stopped at the lights, but it did stop, and I think that matters. If you're ever in a situation like this one, give it nothing. Not your voice, not your name, not your footsteps on the stairs. Let the light do the work and wait for sunrise. Story 2. The survey crew at mile marker 41. My footsteps echoed back to me from the tree line, but I had been standing completely still for 4 minutes. I know exactly how long because I had just checked my watch when the sound started. 4 minutes of standing on a gravel logging road in the Ouachita National Forest with my transit case on my shoulder, and something in those trees had been copying every step I'd taken since the access gate. When I turned to face the sound directly, it stopped. And then, after a pause that lasted maybe 3 seconds, it started again, this time moving toward me. I've been a land surveyor for a little over 10 years. Before that, I did a 3-year stint with a forestry contractor in Missouri, so timber ground and remote access roads are not new to me. I know what this work looks like, and I know what it sounds like, and I am generally not a person who gets rattled by unfamiliar terrain. I'm telling you that so you understand that what happened that October in the Ouachita took considerable effort to rattle me, and it succeeded anyway. Our crew was 3 people. Myself, a guy I'll call Garrett, who was my equipment operator and had been working with me for 6 years, and a newer hire named Spencer, who was on his 2nd season. We'd been contracted to complete a boundary resurvey along a timber block adjacent to the Arkansas-Oklahoma border, a section of ground that had been logged in the early 90s and was now thick second-growth oak and shortleaf pine with a dense understory of dogwood and sumac. The canopy was just starting to turn. This was mid-October. The leaves going orange and bronze, and the visibility through the timber was better than it would have been a month earlier, but still broken. Maybe 40 or 50 feet before the understory closed things off. We'd been on this job for 3 days. The previous week's crew had set preliminary stakes at most of the major control points, and our job was to verify and refine those, set the final boundary monuments, and produce the field notes for the client. Standard work, we expected to finish by Friday, and we were on track. The trouble started on the 3rd day, which was a Wednesday. We accessed the site from an unmarked gravel road off of State Highway 28 through a locked gate that the land manager had given us the combination to, and drove approximately 2 miles into the timber to our planned starting point, which was a known section corner we'd been using as our primary reference all week. When we got there, the preliminary stake was in the wrong place. I want to be clear about what I mean. This wasn't a slight discrepancy, this wasn't a measurement drift or a datum error. The stake, a 48-inch lath with orange flagging that I had personally driven into the ground on Monday, was now standing approximately 11 feet east of where I had put it, in ground that showed no sign of recent disturbance. No boot prints around it, no drag marks, no evidence that anyone had been there since we'd left Tuesday afternoon. 11 feet is not a rounding error. 11 feet is not wind or frost heave. 11 feet means someone pulled the stake, moved 11 feet east, and drove it back in. Precisely. The stake was fully driven, not leaning, not loose, driven to the same depth. Garrett looked at it for a long time and then looked at me. Spencer said maybe we'd written the coordinates down wrong. I said we hadn't. We went to the next control point. That stake was moved too. And the one after that, not randomly, not maliciously scattered. Each one had been relocated a consistent distance in a consistent direction, as if someone with survey knowledge had come behind us and made a systematic correction. The problem was that the correction was wrong. Whatever had moved these stakes had moved them to positions that would have produced a boundary line about 30 feet east of the correct one, which, in a timber contract, is not a small error. We spent the first 2 hours of that morning re-establishing our control and resetting the disturbed stakes. I noted the discrepancy in my field book. We did not have an explanation. We moved on. At approximately 10:30 a.m., Spencer set down his equipment rod at a control point on the west boundary and walked about 40 feet into the timber to relieve himself. He was gone maybe 3 minutes. When he came back, his face was different, not pale exactly, but closed down, the way a face goes when something has happened that the person hasn't processed yet. I asked him what was wrong. He said he'd heard his own name from the ridge above him in his own voice. I looked at Garrett. Garrett kept his expression neutral in the way that experienced field people do when they're deciding whether to take something seriously. I asked Spencer to describe it exactly. He said he'd heard his name, just his name, no other words, called from somewhere on the slope above the timber, maybe 150 feet uphill. He said it sounded exactly like his voice, the same pitch and cadence, and that he'd looked up and seen nothing on the ridge. I wrote it in the field notes. Auditory anomaly, west boundary, 10:37 a.m. Spencer's name, self-described as, matching own voice, source unlocated. I included it not because I knew what to do with it, but because field notes are supposed to be complete. We kept working. By 1 p.m. we had moved to the northeastern corner of the block, which required setting up the transit on the knoll to establish a long sight line down the east boundary. I was behind the instrument. Garrett was holding the rod at the boundary point, about 220 feet down the slope, and Spencer was flagging stakes behind me. I put my eye to the transit scope to get my reading on Garrett's rod and stopped. There was a figure in the sight picture, not Garrett. Garrett was where I expected him, standing on the boundary point 220 feet away, rod held vertical, bright orange vest. The figure was beyond him and to the left, standing in the timber just off the boundary line at approximately 300 feet. I could see it clearly through the scope's magnification. It was very tall. I am 5 feet 11, and Garrett is an even 6 feet, so I have a good visual scale for human height in field conditions. This figure was substantially taller than Garrett, not marginally taller, substantially. The height discrepancy was obvious even at 300 feet, and the proportions were wrong, in a way that I found myself registering slowly, piece by piece, as I kept the scope on it. The legs were long relative to the torso. The arms hung to a position that seemed too low. And the head was, I kept trying to find the word for it, the head was too far forward on the neck, not like someone leaning over, but like the neck joint was placed differently than it should be. It was standing completely still, and it was facing me. I pulled my eye off the scope and looked down the slope with my naked eye. At 300 feet, through the October timber, I couldn't make out the figure at that detail level. I could see a shape, upright, in the right location. I put my eye back to the scope, still there, still facing me. I called down to Garrett. Is there someone in the timber to your left, maybe 300 out? Garrett turned and looked. He looked for a long time. Then he said, slowly, yeah, there's somebody there. Why are they just standing there? I didn't answer that. I said, let's pack up and go to the next point. We did. We ate lunch at the truck, parked at the access gate end of the logging road. Garrett and I didn't discuss the figure directly during lunch. Spencer was quieter than usual. We talked about the job, the completion timeline, whether we'd need a fourth day. Normal conversation as a way of putting normal air around what was happening. After lunch, we went back in. We had 3 more control points to establish on the south boundary. We were almost to the second of those 3 points when I noticed Spencer was no longer behind me. I want to be careful about how I describe the feeling that produces when you are 2 miles from the highway on a remote access road and you look behind you and someone who was there 5 minutes ago is simply not there. It is not a dramatic feeling. It is a quiet, fundamental wrongness, like reaching for a step that isn't where you expected it. You do a second look, you do a third look, you count heads. You realize the count is wrong, and then everything gets very focused. I stopped walking. Garrett had already noticed and turned back. I called Spencer's name. Garrett called it. No answer from the timber. We retraced our route. Spencer's equipment, his range rod, his flagging pouch, his water bottle were on the ground in the middle of the logging road, set down neatly, not dropped. No signs of struggle, no disturbed ground, no blood. Set down like he'd just paused to put his things down and then stepped off the road for a moment. I radioed the district office from the truck on my handheld, gave our location, and said we had a crew member missing in the field. The dispatcher told me a Forest Service truck would be at our gate within 45 minutes. Garrett and I stayed at Spencer's equipment, calling his name at intervals, watching the timber on both sides of the road. At 2:58 p.m., I know the exact time because I checked the watch when it happened. The figure walked out of the tree line onto the logging road. It was wearing Spencer's bright orange safety vest. Let me be precise. It was wearing Spencer's vest, which I recognized because Spencer had written his last name on the back of it in black marker, the way we all do for site accountability. And it was walking toward us from the tree line about 60 feet south of where Spencer's equipment was. But it was not Spencer, Garrett said, quietly and with complete seriousness. That is not a person. He was right. He was right not because of any single feature, but because of the totality of it. The height was wrong, taller than Spencer by at least a foot, the vest straining at the shoulders, the walk was wrong, the step placement too deliberate, each foot set down with a care that human walking doesn't have, and the face, when it turned toward us, was wrong in the way you register wrongness before you can articulate it, the spacing of the features slightly off like a reconstruction rather than the original. It stopped walking when it was about 30 feet from us. Garrett took 3 steps back toward the truck. I didn't move. It looked at me, and when I say looked at me, I mean it oriented its face toward mine and held that orientation with a steadiness that nothing biological should have, and it said Spencer's name, in Spencer's voice. Not his first name, his last name, the one written on the vest. Said it in Spencer's voice, with Spencer's cadence, like a question. I said, "Get in the truck." We got in the truck. I started the engine. The figure stood in the logging road as I put the truck in gear. It did not move when I accelerated toward it. I went around it on the left, off the road, 2 tires in the ditch, brush scraping the passenger side, and I brought it back onto the road and drove hard toward the access gate. I looked in the mirror. When I had enough distance, the figure was standing at the edge of the road, not following, not moving, standing at the edge of the gravel exactly where the road met the timber. It did not cross the road to follow us. The Forest Service truck was at our gate when we arrived. 2 rangers, a man and a woman, both in uniform. I reported the missing crew member and the figure and everything else I've described here. One of the rangers, the woman, who had 15 years in the district, did not look surprised in a way that told me she'd heard things like this before, or something like it. She logged it without comment and organized a search team. Spencer was found at 4:40 p.m., approximately 2 miles from where his equipment had been left, at the bottom of a draw in the timber. He was on his feet, physically unharmed, no injuries we could identify. He had no memory of the period between approximately 1:30 p.m. and when the search team reached him. He knew his name, knew ours, knew the job site. He did not know where he'd been for 2.5 hours or how he'd gotten where he was found. He quit the following Monday. He didn't give a detailed explanation. He just said he was done with field work and thanked me for finding him. I filed the complete incident report with the district office. The report case number OU-41-OCT is on file with the Ouachita National Forest Supervisor's Office, if you know who to ask. We did not go back to finish the south boundary. The client extended our timeline with no argument when I explained there had been a safety incident. I don't know if the boundary work was ever completed. I didn't take any more jobs in that section. Here's what I want you to take from this. If you do field work in remote timber and your survey stakes start moving in a systematic pattern between visits, not scattered, not knocked over, moved deliberately, that is the first sign. The second sign is your own voice coming back to you from a direction where no one should be. At that point, you establish a code word with your crew at the start of every day. Something simple that you'd never say naturally in conversation. If a crew member can't produce it, if someone walks up in your partner's vest and your partner's voice and doesn't immediately know the word you get in the truck, you do not wait to find out what it is. You do not engage with it. You do not let it close the distance. You get in the truck and you drive until you can see the highway. Story 3, White River Float. I was the only one who made it out of that stretch of river. I want to be honest with you about what that sentence means and what it doesn't mean, because people hear it and assume the worst. The other paddler didn't die, not that I know of, but his canoe was never recovered from the Buffalo National River, and he never checked out at the Pruitt access point, and the park ranger who handled the report told me, in a tone that suggested she'd seen this pattern before, that missing canoes in that section during November have a history she wasn't going to document in front of me. What happened to the man in that second canoe, I genuinely do not know. But I know what I saw on the river, and I know why I got out and he didn't. I've been paddling the Buffalo National River in Arkansas since my mid-20s. It's about a 4-hour drive from where I live, and I try to do at least one solo float a year, usually in the off-season when the crowd is gone and the water is lower and you can hear the river instead of other people's music. Late November is my favorite window. The deciduous canopy is stripped down by then, so the light gets into the canyon in ways it can't manage in summer, and the air has that cold stone smell that sandstone bluffs get when the temperature drops. Elk are in the area through the winter. If you're quiet and early, you'll hear them in the timber above the river. The float I'm going to describe started on a Saturday in late November. I put in at the Steel Creek access point at approximately 8:15 in the morning. The plan was 4 days to Pruitt, which is a manageable section, about 37 miles of river with a few mile rapids, mostly flat water with some current. One significant drop at Kyle's Landing that requires a look before you run it in low water. I'd done this exact section twice before. I was paddling a 15-foot Old Town Penobscot loaded with about 60 pounds of gear and food, sitting low and stable. Water temperature was 41 degrees. Air temperature at put-in was 34 degrees and rising. I signed the float plan at the Steel Creek board name, put-in date, plan takeout date, vehicle description, emergency contacts. I noted the water gauge reading, which was 1.4 feet at the Steel Creek gauge, good for November. And then I launched and let the current take me south. The first day was everything I'd hoped for. The canyon walls closed in within the first 2 miles, and the bluffs rose above me on both sides, pale gray limestone layered and stacked, and the river ran clear and cold over gravel bars that glittered in the morning light. I saw 2 great blue herons, a bald eagle working the far bank, and fresh elk tracks in a sandy eddy deposit where the animals had clearly been drinking at dawn. I made good miles, camped at a gravel bar below Irby Ford on the first night, ate well, slept cold, and well under a sky so clear the stars were almost painful. The second day was when the first wrong thing happened. I was about 4 miles below Irby, coming around a long left bend in the river when I smelled it. Not decay exactly, nothing as familiar as a dead animal, sharper than that. Something metallic and dry underneath, a smell that I can only describe as emptied, like the smell of a room where something biological has been comprehensively removed. I looked toward the left bank as I came around the bend and saw the source, a deer carcass on the gravel bar, close to the water line. I edged the canoe toward the bank to look at it, because this is the kind of thing you look at if you've spent time in wilderness. A carcass tells you things about what's living in the area. This one told me things I didn't know what to do with. The bones were clean. Not picked at, not scattered, not the result of a days-long scavenging process. Completely clean, the way bones get after weeks of exposure in the right conditions. But the arrangement was wrong for that explanation. The skeleton was almost entirely intact and in anatomical order, like the animal had simply been emptied and left in place. No drag marks radiating out from the carcass, no tufts of hair or blood staining the gravel around it, no smell of rot, which is what should have been there if this had been a natural death and predation sequence. The bones were also white, bleached white, not the gray white of a winter-killed deer that's been out since February. The clean, almost powder white of bones that have been processed rather than weathered. I sat with my paddle across my knees and looked at it for about a minute. There were no animal tracks in the wet sand around the carcass, no bird activity, no insects. Nothing was interested in this carcass, which is not how it works when there's organic material available. I pushed off the bank and kept paddling. I made camp that second night at a wide gravel bar above Woolham Ford. I had seen no other paddlers all day, which was what I expected in November. I set up my tarp shelter, got a fire going from driftwood collected above the waterline, cooked dinner, and was sitting at the fire with a cup of coffee watching the river run dark in the firelight when I heard the canoe. Paddles on water have a sound that dip and pull, the drip on recovery, the subtle creak of a boat under load. I know this sound well. I heard it from upstream, in the dark, and I assumed it was another paddler working late to make camp, which was unusual for November, but not impossible. I waited for the bow light that any responsible paddler running in the dark would be carrying. No light came. The sound continued. Dip, pull, drip. Steady pace. Someone was paddling steadily in the dark without a bow light, which meant either a very foolish paddler or someone who didn't need one. The canoe appeared from the upstream dark and passed through the edge of my firelight. It was a solo canoe, green, old Royal X hull from the shape of it, and the person paddling it sat in a low position, forward-leaning, moving at a pace that matched the current. The figure didn't look toward my fire, didn't acknowledge me at all, kept the same stroke tempo, and disappeared into the dark downstream of my camp. I thought, odd. I thought, none of my business. I put more wood on the fire and turned in. In the morning, I broke camp at first light and launched. Within the first mile, I could see the green canoe ahead of me on the river, just visible around a bend, moving at roughly my pace, which was strange because I'm not a slow paddler and I'd launched at dawn and that canoe had passed my camp in the dark hours before. I didn't think about this carefully enough at the time. I was watching the river, watching the bluffs, eating a protein bar for breakfast, doing the things you do on the first hour of a paddle day. The green canoe stayed ahead of me. Not pulling away, not falling back, maintaining. I picked up my pace. Canoe didn't gap me. I slowed deliberately. Canoe held its distance. For the rest of that morning, no matter what I did with my pace, that canoe ahead of me maintained an identical separation, about 300 meters. You can tell yourself a lot of explanations for this. Good paddler, light load, familiar river. I told myself these things until about noon, when we both eddied out independently on opposite sides of a shallow riffle above Kyle's landing me on the right to scout the drop, the green canoe on the left. And I got my first real look at the person in it. I had my binoculars out to scout the rapid. I swung them across the river to look at the other paddler out of the same reflex you use when you see another person on a wilderness river. Curiosity, the instinct to wave and maybe have a conversation. The figure was seated in the stern of the canoe with the paddle across the gunwales, facing downstream, not looking at the rapid, not looking at the bank, not moving. I focused the binoculars. The figure was wearing a dark jacket and a hat pulled low. In late November, on a cold river, this is normal. What was not normal was the boots. I could see the boots clearly, because the figure had one foot up on the gunwale, a position you sometimes take for comfort on flat water. The boots were dry. Not just dry in the sense of not currently wet dry in the complete sense, the kind of dry that means no water has contacted them. My own boots were soaked through from a brief wade at the put-in 2 days ago and had not fully dried since. This paddler had boots that appeared to have never touched water. I looked at the hull of the canoe. It was wet, catching the light. The paddle was wet. The figure's jacket sleeves were dark with moisture. The boots were completely dry. I looked up from the binoculars, and the figure had turned its head and was looking directly across the river at me. Even at that distance, across moving water, with a hat pulled low, the face was wrong. I can't give you a specific anatomical description because the distance and the hat and the river light didn't allow for that. What I can tell you is the same thing I've described before, that category level recognition of something that doesn't belong in the category you've assigned it to. Wrong. Just wrong. I ran Kyle's Landing. It was not a hard drop at 1.4 feet, and I ran it clean left channel, drew left at the bottom to avoid the submerged ledge. When I came out below the rapid, I looked for the green canoe. It was behind me, not downstream behind me. It had not run the drop while I was in it. It was sitting in the eddy on the left bank above the rapid, stationary, the figure watching me from upstream. It had not run the rapid. It had been upstream, watching me run it, and now it would follow me downstream again, maintaining its distance. And this time the distance was behind me instead of ahead. I did not stop to camp that night. I paddled until I couldn't safely see the river anymore, and then I pulled over on a gravel bar and set up a minimal camp sleeping bag. No fire, no food prep, just enough to get a few hours of rest before first light. I did not hear the green canoe on the water that night. I heard the river and the wind in the bare sycamores above the bank, and I lay in my sleeping bag watching the sky pale toward dawn. I was on the water before full light. The green canoe was behind me. 300 meters, same as always. I pushed the pace. I pushed it hard, harder than I'd planned for the last day of a float, digging in and holding a pace that had me breathing hard within the first mile. The green canoe did not fall back. It held 300 meters, regardless of how hard I paddled. There's a section of river about 4 miles above Pruitt, where the river splits around a long gravel island, and the right channel is shallow and rocky, and the left channel runs fast and deep. I took the right channel. It required getting out of the canoe twice to line the boat through shallow sections, wading in 41-degree water to my thighs, sliding the hull over gravel that scraped to the bottom of the boat. The green canoe did not follow me into the right channel. When I came out at the bottom of the island and could see the left channel entry from a distance, the green canoe was sitting motionless in the water at the island's head, not entering either channel, just stopped. I paddled hard for Pruitt. The takeout at Pruitt is a concrete ramp and a gravel parking lot above it. When my bow touched the ramp, I got out of the canoe and pulled it up and turned around and looked at the river. No green canoe. The river was empty in both directions, as far as I could see. There was a park ranger at the bulletin board near the parking lot. I walked over and reported what I'd seen. The ranger, a woman named Paulette, according to her nameplate, listened to everything I described and then asked me if I'd gotten a look at the paddler's face. I said not clearly. She asked me to describe the canoe more specifically. I did. She walked to the launch register and opened it. She found an entry for a solo green canoe that had launched from Steel Creek the day before I did 1 day before, and had not been checked in at any downstream access point. She looked at the entry for a long moment and then told me she'd need to open a search case. The canoe was never found. I gave a full statement and my contact information and drove home. I have floated other rivers since then. I have not gone back to the Buffalo. There's nothing wrong with that river, and I am not telling you to stay off it. What I am telling you is this. If something follows you on the water and maintains a fixed distance, regardless of your pace, take the first portage available. Cross the shallows, line the boat over rocks, do whatever you have to do to put a stretch of unpaddleable water between you and it. Get to the takeout and report everything. And sign the float plan. Always sign the float plan, every detail, as it's the first thing they look for when they open the case. Story 4. The Winter Trail Crew. It put its hand on my arm, and I felt the fingers close around my forearm through my jacket sleeve, and I looked down, and the fingers were wrong. Not wrong the way an injury is wrong. Wrong. The way a drawing of a hand is wrong when the person drawing it doesn't fully understand how hands work, too many angles, the joints bending in directions that joints don't bend, the grip producing pressure from points that had no business producing pressure. I looked up from the hand into the face that was supposed to be my crew chief's face, and whatever was behind those eyes looked back at me, and in that moment I stopped being cold. I became very, very still. I have worked seasonal trail maintenance in Wyoming's National Forest System for going on 11 years. It is work I chose deliberately because I am not built for offices, and the work is honest. You go out, you clear what needs clearing, you improve what needs improving, and at the end of the day you can see what you did. In the shoulder seasons, particularly November before the winter closure, the work is often just the 4 of us and 50 miles of trail and an old snowcat for access, and that suits me fine. The crew that November consisted of me, 2 other workers I'll call Ray and Tomas, who I had worked with for several seasons, and our crew chief, a man named Walt who'd been running trail crews in the Shoshone National Forest for 19 years. Walt was a thick, patient man in his late 50s who communicated primarily in short declarative sentences and who knew every section of the Washakie Wilderness Trail system with the precision of someone who had walked every foot of it in every season. He was the kind of crew chief you stop second-guessing after your first season with him because he is simply always right. Walt had gone to the emergency room in Cody on a Tuesday chest pain that turned out to be nothing serious but required monitoring and was expected back by Thursday at the latest. In his absence, I was running the crew. We had one more productive workday planned for Wednesday, clearing a section of deadfall from a November storm that had dropped 3 significant trees across the upper Ishawua Creek Trail, and then we'd button everything up for the season. Wednesday morning. Shoshone National Forest, Upper Washakie Wilderness, just south of the Yellowstone boundary. Early November, 8 inches of new snow from the previous week sitting on top of the old pack, temperature at 6 a.m. When we loaded the snowcat was 12 degrees Fahrenheit. The sky was the particular flat white of a sky that hasn't decided whether it's going to snow again yet. We drove the snowcat to the trailhead and hiked in from there. The trail was easy to follow. The storm deadfall we were targeting had been flagged during a reconnaissance hike the previous week. Orange tape on the trees around the fall zone. A note in the crew log with GPS coordinates. The hike in was about 1.5 miles from the snowcat. Quiet work in the cold, the snow squeaking underfoot. The timber on both sides frosted and still. That's when I found the boot prints. They appeared mid-trail. Not at the trailhead, not from any visible departure point from the timber. They simply began in the middle of the packed snow surface, 2 feet apart, heel-to-toe impression, full human boot print, pointing in the same direction we were walking. As if someone had been set down from above directly onto the trail surface and had walked ahead of us from that point. I stopped and looked back. Our own tracks behind us. Before them, undisturbed snow. The mystery prints began 3 feet ahead of where I was standing and continued forward along the trail as far as I could see. Ray came up beside me and looked at them. He said, "Who's ahead of us?" I said I didn't know. Tomas, who had been working with mountain crews long enough to develop strong opinions about unexplained things, looked at the origin point of the prints for a long time and said nothing. His expression suggested he had opinions he was keeping to himself. We followed our planned route. The mystery prints continued ahead of us for about 1/4 mile and then diverged from the trail, heading upslope into the timber. I watched them go and didn't follow. We reached the deadfall and went to work. 2 of the 3 trees were straightforward 6-inch diameter trunks, clean cuts, section, and remove, done inside an hour. The third was a larger spruce, maybe 14 inches at the trunk, that had come down at an angle across the trail and lodged against another standing tree, creating a suspended situation that required care with the saw. I sent Ray and Tomas to work on clearing the smaller debris while I evaluated the big spruce. At approximately 10:20 a.m., from the timber upslope of the trail, a voice called Walt's nickname. I want to be specific about the nickname because it matters for what comes next. Walt's crew nickname was not Walt. It was a nickname he'd acquired sometime in the 90s related to an incident with a grouse and a chainsaw that he'd told the story of enough times that most of the district trail staff knew it. It was not a name you'd find on any official document. It was not something a stranger would know. It was the kind of nickname that only exists within a community of people who have worked together for years. The voice from the timber used it. Ray looked up from the debris pile. Tomas looked at me. I looked at the timber upslope. "Who's up there?" I called back. No answer. The timber was still. Snowfall that the storm had left on the branches was dropping in small clumps at intervals where the rising temperature was releasing it. I went back to evaluating the spruce. At 10:52, the figure appeared on the trail below us. It was coming from the direction of the trailhead, the same direction we'd come from, and it was moving with the unhurried pace of someone who walks this ground regularly and is not in a hurry. From a distance, through the falling snow that had started about 20 minutes earlier, it was Walt. The height was right, the build was right. The dark green Shoshone National Forest jacket was the same one Walt owned, same worn patch on the left shoulder, same broken zipper pull at the collar. He wore a knit hat pulled low. I felt a brief, concrete relief. He'd been released from the hospital early and come up to check on the crew. This was a Walt thing to do. I called out to him. He raised a hand in acknowledgement and kept walking toward us. Ray saw him and said, "Walt's here." Tomas said nothing. He had stopped working and was watching the approaching figure with the careful stillness of a man who has not yet decided something. The figure reached us. Close up, in the falling snow, the face was, I'm going to say, almost right, because that's the most accurate way to say it. The features I was familiar with from 4 seasons of working alongside Walt were present in the correct arrangement, but the quality of them was slightly off in the way that a very good photograph of a face differs from the face itself. The texture was wrong. The expressiveness was wrong. The face moved appropriately when it needed to, produced the right expressions, but they appeared a half second after they should have, like a translation happening between intention and execution. And the figure was dry. Walt had parked somewhere, hiked 1.5 miles through 8 inches of snow and falling conditions, and he was dry. His jacket was dry. His boots showed no snowpack. His hat was dry. He asked how the big spruce was going. I told him. I watched his face while I talked about the spruce. The responses came at normal intervals, made sense, referenced details that Walt would know. But they were fractionally ahead of where they should have been, the answers appearing just before I finished the questions, in the way that happens when someone knows what you're going to say and doesn't bother waiting for you to finish. Ray was talking to him now, asking about the hospital, and the figure answered in Walt's voice with Walt's inflections and made a joke about hospital food that sounded exactly like something Walt would say. Ray laughed. Tomas was not participating in the conversation. He was standing about 10 feet back, watching. The figure asked to use my radio to check in with the district office. I reached for the radio on my chest strap with its right hand. I have described already what happened when I looked at that hand. I will add one detail: the fingernails. On the back of a hand reaching for your radio, you see the fingernails. These were the correct shape and color, but they were set into the skin wrong, the edges of each nail sitting slightly proud of the flesh in a way that suggested they had been placed rather than grown. I stepped back. The grip tightened slightly before releasing. The figure looked at me. I said, "Walt, what's the code?" We had established a crew code word on Monday morning, the day Walt left for Cody. Standard practice I had implemented 2 seasons ago after a crew member got lost and we wasted an hour confirming it was actually him on the radio and not radio interference. The word that Monday had been a random selection, a word that had come up in a conversation about a completely unrelated topic, chosen specifically because it would never arise naturally in work conversation. The figure looked at me. It did not say the code word. It said something else, something that started with the same letter, something that, in the context of the conversation, might have sounded like it was heading in the right direction, but it was not the code word. I said, "Tomas, Ray, Snowcat, now." Tomas was already moving. Ray started to object, and then looked at my face and stopped objecting and moved. We walked fast. Not running. I've learned that running in a situation like this can produce a response you don't want, but moving with purpose, and not looking back more than necessary. The figure called after us. Walt's voice, Walt's cadence, saying our names in sequence, asking where we were going, asking what was wrong. We reached the Snowcat. I got it started and put it in gear before Ray had fully closed his door. I drove the access road without stopping. When the Snowcat headlights hit the road surface ahead of us, the snowfall was heavy enough to limit visibility to about 40 feet. In the mirrors I could see nothing but white and the dark line of the timber on both sides. Nothing followed us onto the road. The actual Walt called my cell phone at 3:17 p.m. to ask how the deadfall clearing had gone. He was still in Cody. The hospital had decided to keep him one more night for observation. He sounded tired, but fine. I asked him who else knew his crew nickname. He thought about it and said probably 30 or 40 people in the district who'd been around long enough. Why was I asking? I told him I'd tell him when he was back. I filed the incident report with the district office that evening from the motel where we were staying in Dubois. The report SNFSH-114-NOV was logged and forwarded to the Forest Supervisor's office. The trail section we'd been working is officially listed as closed for winter maintenance, which it would have been anyway, but the closure was formalized earlier than scheduled. Walt came back Thursday. I told him everything. He sat with his coffee and listened without interrupting, which is the Walt way of processing information. When I finished, he said that wasn't the first time something like that had been reported in that drainage. He didn't say what the other reports described. I didn't ask. Here is what matters. Establish a code word with your crew at the start of every single day in the field. Not the same word every day, a new one each morning. Something that won't come up naturally, something random, something you choose together before you separate. If someone who looks like a crew member comes back to you and can't produce that word, you do not investigate, you do not confront, you do not give it time to learn your voice or your patterns. You walk to the vehicle and you drive to the highway. The cold doesn't bother it. The snow doesn't bother it. What it doesn't seem to cross is a plowed road with headlights on it. I don't know why. I just know that it stopped. Story 5. Dispatch at 40 below. The voice on the exterior intercom said my site manager's name, used his exact phrasing, described a equipment failure that matched the exact failure I'd logged in the previous week's report. A report that existed only in our internal system, that no one outside this operation had access to. And then it asked me to open the door. I was looking at the exterior camera feed when it said this. The camera showed a figure standing at the intercom panel with no breath vapor coming from its mouth. It was 42 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit outside that cabin, and whatever was standing at my door was not producing breath vapor. I did not open the door. I need to explain first that this report was pulled. The site manager, a man I'll call Conrad, because I'm not naming names and causing problems for people who are just trying to run a legitimate operation, submitted a partial incident report to the mining company's safety office that described the evening as a communication anomaly and exterior sensor malfunction. That version of events is in the official record. The version I am about to give you is what I wrote in my personal log that same night, immediately after it happened, because I am a methodical person and I document things. I'm telling you because the official version is wrong, and the wrong version being the only version bothers me considerably. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 2 winters as a remote dispatch and safety officer for a small placer gold mining operation in interior Alaska, working a site in the Yukon-Charlie Rivers National Preserve region, which is some of the most remote and genuinely hostile terrain in North America. The preserve is about 2.5 million acres of subarctic wilderness along the Yukon River, characterized by open boreal forest, river drainages, and climate that will kill you in under an hour if you're not dressed for it in February. The mining operation ran a winter crew of 7-5 extraction workers, split between 2 satellite sites and 2 support staff, including me, and my job was to sit in the dispatch cabin, maintain communication with both sites, monitor weather, coordinate equipment logistics, and generally be the person who knows where everyone is at all times. This is not glamorous work. The dispatch cabin was about the size of a generous shipping container, insulated to within reason, heated by a diesel-burning stove that consumed fuel at an impressive rate in the deep cold. I had a satellite phone, 2 HF radios, a bank of security cameras covering the cabin perimeter and the equipment yard, and a laptop connected to the satellite uplink for logging and communication. Standard check-in protocol was every 2 hours. I logged every contact in a time-stamped digital log that synced to the company server. The night I'm describing was a Wednesday in February. Temperature at sunset had been -38 Fahrenheit and dropping. By the time the shift I'm going to tell you about began, it was -42, which is the kind of temperature where metal becomes brittle and exposed skin begins to freeze in under 4 minutes, and you don't go outside for anything that isn't a genuine emergency. I was expecting a quiet night. The week had been quiet. The previous check-in cycle had been routine, all 7 crew members accounted for, both sites operating normally, weather holding. At 11:07 p.m., Site 2 called in. I want to be precise about the timeline because the timeline is the whole thing. Protocol check-in for Site 2 was 11:18 p.m. The call came in at 11:07, 11 minutes early. I noted this in the log: early check-in. Site 2, and answered. The voice on the line identified itself as the Site 2 team lead, a man named Garrett. I knew Garrett's voice. I'd been talking to him twice daily for 8 weeks. The voice on that 11:07 call was Garrett's voice, accurately produced, same regional accent, same habit of starting sentences with "so" that Garrett had. It gave a weather report, a crew count, an equipment status, all of it correct, all of it current. What it didn't have was the generator. Site 2 ran a diesel generator for heat and power that produced a constant background roar on every communication from that site. You stopped hearing it after a few days the way you stop hearing an air conditioner, but it was always there. The 11:07 call had no generator sound. The background was completely silent. I noted this in the log. Possible equipment issue. Site 2 generator comms at 11:07 showed no background noise. I signed off the call normally and started a secondary log entry for follow-up. At 11:14 p.m., Site 2 called in again. This was the actual Garrett. I knew it immediately because the generator was there and because the first thing Garrett said was, "Hey, did you just call us about 10 minutes ago?" I told him I had not called them. He said someone had called Site 2 on the site frequency, identified themselves as dispatch, and asked for a crew count and equipment status. I told him that was not me, that Site 2 had called in 11 minutes early and I had taken that call and logged it, and that the call he was describing was not anything I had initiated. Garrett went quiet for a moment. Then he said, "So who did we just talk to?" I didn't have an answer for that. I told him to do a full crew count and contact me immediately with the result. He confirmed 7 people on site, all accounted for. I told him to increase check-in frequency to 30-minute intervals until further notice and log the anomaly with a flag for the morning report. At 11:31 p.m., the exterior motion sensor triggered. I have 4 cameras, on the dispatch cabin exterior north, south, east, west. They're standard security cameras with infrared capability for nighttime operation. When the motion sensor triggers, all 4 feeds come up on a split screen on my monitor automatically. I looked at the feeds. The east camera showed a figure at approximately 8 meters from the cabin wall, standing in the equipment yard between 2 inactive excavators. Upright, bipedal, dark clothing or dark coloring at that camera resolution and that temperature. The IR had trouble separating detail. The figure was not moving. It was simply standing there. I watched it for 30 seconds. It didn't move. I noted the time and logged the sensor trigger and the visual. I looked at the east camera feed and looked for breath vapor. At -42 Fahrenheit, breath vapor is not optional. It is large, dense, and immediately visible in any IR camera that has a clear field of view. I have watched this camera feed for 2 winters, and breath vapor is one of the most consistent visual features of any human figure in this temperature. The figure in the equipment yard produced no breath vapor at all. I watched for a full 2 minutes. The figure stood motionless in the equipment yard between the excavators. No breath, no movement, no vapor. My mouth was dry. I picked up the satellite phone and called Conrad, the site manager, who was off shift and in his sleeping quarters at Site 1, about 4 miles north. He answered on the 4th ring, groggy, and I explained the situation. The early check-in with no generator background. The call Site 2 had received that wasn't from me, and now a figure in the equipment yard producing no breath vapor at -42. Conrad was quiet for a moment, and then said he was coming over. I said, "Do not come outside. Call me on the satellite when you're awake enough to talk this through." He agreed, and called me back in 5 minutes, fully alert. While I was on the satellite with Conrad, describing the east camera situation, the exterior intercom activated. The intercom is a basic 2-way panel on the east wall of the cabin, mounted outside, used when someone needs access and hasn't radioed ahead. It has a push-to-talk button on the exterior panel. Someone or something pushed that button, and what came out of the speaker was Conrad's voice, not a recording. Conrad was on the satellite phone in my right hand, mid-sentence, talking about possible equipment explanations for the early check-in. And simultaneously, from the exterior intercom, a voice, using Conrad's exact pitch and phrasing, said his own name and then described the generator anomaly from Site 2 in the same terms I had just used to describe it to Conrad. The same terms I'd used 30 seconds earlier on the satellite call. It was reconstructing the conversation in real time from outside the cabin. I said into the satellite phone, "Conrad, don't say anything." Conrad stopped talking. We both listened. Outside, on the intercom panel, the voice continued filling in Conrad's half of the conversation, producing what Conrad might have said next in Conrad's voice, following the logical thread of what we'd been discussing. Then it stopped, and in a slightly different register, still Conrad's voice, it said, "It's too cold out here. Let me in." I looked at the east camera feed. The figure had moved from the equipment yard. It was now at the intercom panel, which was outside my east camera's full coverage zone. I could see part of it at the camera's edge, the arm, the shoulder. Still no breath vapor. I said into the satellite, "Are you seeing this on your tablet?" Conrad had a company tablet with camera access. He said, "Yeah, I see it." A pause. "Don't open the door." I had no intention of opening the door. The figure stood at the intercom for 22 minutes. During that time, it spoke intermittently, cycling through several voices, mine, Conrad's, Garrett's, and at one point produced what appeared to be a replay of an internal conversation Conrad and I had had 2 weeks earlier about the fuel consumption logs, a conversation that had happened inside the cabin over the radio and that no external party should have had access to. At 12:14 a.m., the perimeter floodlights kicked on. They were set to a timer that activated at midnight. I had forgotten this, and they illuminated the entire cabin exterior and equipment yard at high lumen output. The figure moved immediately. It withdrew from the intercom panel and moved across the equipment yard, visible on the south and east cameras, moving in a direction that took it toward the tree line on the eastern edge of the clearing. It moved quickly, much more quickly than I expected, covering the 40 meters to the tree line in a few seconds. And then it was in the timber, and the cameras lost it. It did not return. Conrad was at the cabin by 8 the following morning. He reviewed the camera footage with me. He reviewed the communication logs. He made some calls. The official report that was filed described a communication anomaly and sensor malfunction. The camera footage from that night, I do not know what happened to it. The file on the company's server was flagged as corrupted by the following Monday. The mining company ended winter operations at that site the following October. The stated reason was cost of operation. Conrad told me separately that there had been 2 other incidents in previous seasons that he hadn't put in writing. He didn't describe them in detail. I left Alaska that spring, and I have not gone back. Here is the protocol I'd follow now, knowing what I know. If a remote check-in comes in early and the ambient background sound of that site is missing from the transmission, do not engage. Do not respond. End the call and initiate contact with the site directly through a separate line. Do not describe what you heard to anyone on an open channel before you've confirmed the situation, because whatever is doing this can hear you and will use what it hears. Keep your communication with real people on a separate line until you understand what is happening. And if it tells you it's cold and asks you to open the door lights on, door locked, and you wait for sunrise, the lights matter. I don't know why, but they matter. Story 6. The logging road off Route 42. The dashcam footage exists. It is sitting in an evidence bag in the Cook County Sheriff's Office in Grand Marais, Minnesota, and I was told by the deputy who took my statement not to discuss it publicly. I'm discussing it publicly because the official explanation, equipment interference causing visual artifacts on the recording, does not account for the 4 hours missing from my logbook, the damage to the passenger side of my cab, or the handprint on the outside of the passenger window that a forensic technician quietly confirmed was not a human handprint. I drove that route for 8 years. I know every mile of it. What I saw that October night was not equipment interference. Long-haul trucking in the North Country is a specific kind of work. You develop a relationship with certain routes the way other people develop relationships with certain roads on their commute. You know, the curves, where the frost heaves are worst in March, which pullouts are wide enough for a loaded rig and which aren't, where the cell service dies and where it comes back. The route I ran most often in those years was a timber supply run. Pick up at a mill operation outside Duluth, delivery to a processing yard near the Canadian border, return run empty. About 400 miles round trip, mostly on US Route 61 up the Lake Superior shore and then northwest on county roads into the timber country. The leg I'm going to describe is the stretch of county road between the lakeshore turnoff and the delivery yard, about 60 miles of 2-lane blacktop that runs through the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness on the south and Superior National Forest on the north, with a lot of unmarked logging roads branching off both sides. At night, particularly in late October when the leaves are gone and the timber is dark and skeletal, it is as empty and as dark as roads in America get. You can drive 40 miles without seeing another vehicle. You run your CB radio to check for other trucks at the few shared stretches, but mostly it's quiet, just the engine and the road and the darkness outside the headlights. My rig that night was a Peterbilt 389 with a 60-foot flatbed carrying a load of green timber rough-cut spruce, about 40,000 pounds, gross. The load was properly secured with chains and binders. I'd done the pre-trip, I'd done the scale stop at the certified station outside Two Harbors. Everything was clean. I turned off Route 61 onto the county road at approximately 9:45 p.m. Weather was clear, temperature was about 28 degrees, no precipitation. The road was dry. At 10:07 p.m., approximately 12 miles into the county road section, something crossed my headlight beam. I want to be precise about this because it's the detail I've been asked about most often. It crossed from the left side of the road to the right, moving fast, and it was upright, not four-legged, 2 legs, bipedal, moving with a speed that was inconsistent with a person running faster than that, covering the width of the road in what seemed like 2 steps. But it was not shaped like an animal either. The head-to-body ratio was human. The arm movement was human. It was just too fast and too large, and it cleared the road and was into the right side timber before I had fully registered what I was seeing. I did not brake hard. I slowed, because that's the right response to a road crossing on a loaded rig. You don't hammer the brakes on 40,000 pounds of timber. But I slowed, and I scanned both shoulders and the road ahead, and saw nothing. No animal standing on the shoulder, no person, nothing. I logged it mentally and kept driving. Large animals are not uncommon on these roads at night. I told myself, moose. Moose are large and fast and look wrong in headlights, especially in the shoulder season when you're tired. Except moose don't cross roads on 2 legs. About 2 miles further, the CB crackled. CB radio on these roads picks up other truckers on the shared frequencies, the occasional local who runs a CB in their pickup, sometimes hunters in camp who use CB to coordinate. What it picked up at approximately 10:13 p.m. was not any of those things. It was my own voice, reading back my mile markers. I had been doing what drivers do on long solo runs, talking to myself, a habit I had developed over years. At about mile marker 41, I'd said aloud to no one, mile 41, 3 more miles to the cutoff, and I'd been doing this for most of the run, logging my progress verbally as a way of staying sharp. What came back on the CB at 10:13 was my voice, clearly, unmistakably mine, saying, mile 38, mile 39, mile 40, mile 41. My exact words, in sequence, played back to me through the CB speaker with the slight static quality of a transmitted signal. I picked up the CB handset and said, "Who's on this frequency?" Silence. Then my own voice said, "Mile 42." I put the handset down. At mile 43, the flagman appeared. He was standing in the road on the left shoulder, facing my headlights, with a road crew flag, one of the orange triangular flags on a metal staff held up in the standard slow signal. I slowed. Protocol on an unflagged 2-lane with a night road crew is to slow to 15 miles per hour and await direction. I slowed and put my high beams down and looked for the rest of the crew, the equipment, the cones, the aero board, the second flagman at the work zone's other end. There was none of that. One man with a flag, standing on the shoulder of a county road in the middle of Superior National Forest at 10:15 p.m., with no equipment behind him, no lights, no cones, no second flagger, no reason for a road closure that I could see in any direction. I stopped the rig about 75 feet back from him and left my headlights on him and waited. He walked toward me. Standard road crew protocol when a driver stops is to walk to the driver's window and communicate the delay. I'm familiar with this. What is not standard is the speed of the walk. This figure covered the 75 feet between us very quickly, more quickly than a person walking casually should cover it, and he was at my driver's door window before I had fully decided what I was doing. I rolled the window down about 4 inches, which is what you do with a stranger at your window at night. The figure put its face close to the gap. The face was a problem. I have a hard time describing the face precisely because my brain was clearly trying to categorize it into something familiar and not quite managing it. The features were arranged in a human layout: 2 eyes, nose, mouth, correct proportions. But the jaw was wrong. Not injured, not swollen. Wrong in a structural sense, as if the joint that allows a jaw to move was placed at a different point than where a human jaw joint is placed, giving the lower face a slight but deeply wrong mobility when he spoke. And the eyes, in the headlight reflection off my mirror, had a reflective quality that eyes don't have, not glasses, the eyes themselves, reflecting the light and holding it. He said, "You should pull over up ahead, take the turn at the marker." His voice was steady and unhurried, normal. Except when he spoke, his breath, it was 28 degrees. My own breath was fogging the window gap. The condensation on the glass was from my own exhalations. His breath produced nothing. His mouth was 6 inches from mine through a 4-inch window gap. No breath vapor. I said, "I'm making a delivery. I don't have a delay on my route sheet." He said, "Take the turn at the marker." He said it again, the same flat, patient inflection, "Take the turn." I rolled the window up. I put the rig in gear. Here is what the dash cam recorded and what I watched on the footage the following morning before the deputy took possession of it. As I accelerated forward, the figure stepped back from the driver's door and then began walking alongside the cab at highway speed. I hit 45 miles per hour on the county road, which is not a speed a person walks at, and the figure stayed alongside my cab, matching speed, its legs moving at a walking pace that should not have covered that ground for a quarter mile exactly. Then it stopped, and it was not visible again. The dash cam also recorded something that I did not see in real time and have no memory of. At approximately 10:31 p.m., 16 minutes after the flagman encounter, the camera shows the rig pulled over on the right shoulder of the road at what appears to be an unmarked logging road cutoff. The rig sat there, engine running, for the majority of the 4-hour gap in my logbook. In the footage, the cab is dark. The lights are on, but nothing moves inside the cab. I have no memory of pulling over. I have no memory of the 4-hour gap at all. My next clear memory is the rig in motion again at approximately 2:40 a.m. approaching the delivery yard. The delivery yard foreman noted my arrival time and asked what had happened. I said I'd had a mechanical issue. He logged the late delivery, no questions. The damage to the passenger side of the cab, 3 parallel depressions in the door metal, as if something had gripped the door from the outside with considerable force. I discovered when I did the post-delivery walkthrough. I did not create that damage. It was not there at the pre-trip inspection. The handprint on the passenger window on the outside of the glass was not there at pre-trip either. I noticed it when I was cleaning the cab 2 days later. The print was large. Not abnormally large by human standards, but large, and the configuration of the fingers, when I looked at it carefully, was wrong. The spacing between the middle and ring fingers was too wide. The angle of the thumb relative to the palm was too acute. I photographed it before I cleaned it. I took the photograph to the sheriff's office when I filed my report. The deputy who took my report was a young man who was professional and took everything I said seriously and did not look at me like I was wasting his time. He was the one who told me the handprint had been flagged for a forensic review. He was also the one who, 2 weeks later, called me to tell me the footage had been classified as evidence and that I should not discuss the contents publicly. I drove that route twice more after this, during daylight. I have not driven it at night again. I am not going to tell you this particular route is unsafe. I don't have enough information to say that, and I'm not in the business of closing down roads with a story. What I can tell you is my practice now. On remote night runs, you do not stop for a single flagman. One flagman, no equipment behind him, no cones, no lights, no arrow board. That is not a road crew. A road crew has a minimum visible footprint. If you can't see the equipment, if you can't see the second flagger, if the math doesn't add up to a legitimate work zone, you slow to a safe speed and you do not stop. You do not roll the window down. You keep moving until you have cell service, and then you call the county road department and ask if there's permitted night work in that section. If there isn't, you file a report and you keep driving. Whatever wanted me to take that turn did not get what it wanted from me in any way I remember or consented to. I do not know what happened in those 4 hours. I don't expect to find out, but I know I came back, and I know the rig came back, and some mornings that has to be enough. Story 7. The search and rescue volunteer. When it turned around and looked at us, it was wearing Kevin's jacket. The orange SAR jacket with the county logo on the chest and Kevin's last name stenciled across the back. The same jacket Kevin had been wearing when he'd gone missing 7 hours earlier. But Kevin was 4'11" and this thing was over 6 feet tall, and the jacket was straining at the shoulders and hanging wrong at the sleeves. And when it opened its mouth and said Kevin's voicemail greeting, his exact voicemail greeting, the one that started with, "Hey, you've reached Kevin. I'm probably on the mountain." In Kevin's exact voice, my team leader put her hand on my arm and said very quietly, "Do not run." I did not run, but I wanted to. I should start with Kevin, because Kevin is what this was about. Kevin Marsh was a 53-year-old retired school teacher from Bryson City, North Carolina, who had been hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park for over 20 years, and who made the same mistake that experienced hikers sometimes make, which is to become so familiar with a place that you stop treating it with the respect it requires. He'd started a solo day hike on the Forney Creek Trail on a Wednesday in early November, signed the trailhead register at 7:50 a.m., and when he didn't return to his car by 5 p.m., his hiking partner, who'd stayed behind with a bad knee, called Park Dispatch. The trail register confirmed his start. His vehicle was still in the lot. Kevin was not. I've been a volunteer with the Swain County Search and Rescue Team for 7 years. We work in coordination with National Park Service rangers on missing persons cases in the Smokies, which is one of the busiest national parks in the country, and which, in the high country above 4,000 feet in November, is also one of the most technically demanding search environments in the southeast. The terrain is steep, the weather changes without notice, the rhododendron thickets that cover the drainage slopes are nearly impenetrable, and the elevation means that a lost and unprepared hiker can develop hypothermia within a few hours of standing still in the wrong weather. Our team was called out at approximately 6:30 p.m. Wednesday evening. Team leader was a woman named Andrea, who'd been running SAR operations in this county for 12 years. With me were 3 other volunteers, a guy I'll call Pete, who was ex-military and good in rough terrain, a woman named Lena, who was a nurse and handled any medical situations, and a newer member named Travis, who was on his 3rd or 4th call-out. We linked up with a park ranger named Officer Holloway at the Forney Creek trailhead at approximately 7:15 p.m. The night was cold and clear. Temperature at trailhead elevation, roughly 1,700 feet, was about 32 degrees. Higher up, where the Forney Creek Trail topped out near the Appalachian Trail ridgeline at just under 5,000 feet, it would be significantly colder, and the forecast suggested clouds and possible light precipitation after midnight. We started up the trail with headlamps and radio, 5 of us plus Officer Holloway. Standard grid search protocol, we'd follow Kevin's likely route and look for any evidence of deviation from the trail. We found his trail within the first mile. Kevin had been keeping to the marked path, which was good, easier to search. At approximately the 2-mile point, a side drainage drops off the east side of the trail into the Forney Creek bottom, and his boot prints in a muddy section of the trail showed he'd paused there, turned, and stepped off trail briefly, probably to look at the drainage, and then returned to the main trail and continued uphill. Normal behavior for an experienced hiker who knows this terrain. Then Pete stopped and knelt. He'd found the second set of tracks. They were alongside Kevin's, beginning from approximately the same point where Kevin had stopped to look at the drainage, but they were not Kevin's. Kevin wore a Vibram-soled boot, and his prints showed clear lug pattern in the mud. These prints alongside his were larger, the strides significantly longer, and the impression showed almost no heel depth. The weight distribution was wrong for a normal human walking gait, more pressure in the forefoot, almost none at the heel, as if whatever was making these tracks was moving with deliberate toe placement rather than a heel-to-toe rolling step. The stride length was approximately 5 feet between each impression. Andrea looked at the tracks for a long time. She looked at Officer Holloway. Either of them said what they were thinking. Andrea logged the location on her GPS and marked it in her field notes and told us to keep moving. She radioed the second team, which was working from a parallel approach via the Springhouse Branch Trail, and told them to keep their eyes on the ground for anything that didn't match the missing subject's boot pattern. At approximately 9:45 p.m., from somewhere above us, on the ridge from the east, above the drainage we were ascending, we heard a whistle. Andrea had established our team's signal whistle pattern at the briefing. 3 short blasts means we have the subject. 2 long blasts means come to my position. 1 long blast is an emergency. The whistle from above us, from the east drainage, where none of our team members were, was 3 short blasts. We have the subject. Andrea looked up the ridge. Then she looked at her radio and keyed it and called both the second team and Officer Holloway's supervisor at the command post and asked if any team had transmitted the 3 blast signal. Nobody had. She told us to hold position. She did not begin moving toward the sound. This is correct SAR protocol. You do not chase an unconfirmed signal into broken terrain at night without verification. You get a secondary confirmation before you move. You've been wrong before, and it's cost people. The whistle came again from above. 3 short blasts, same direction, clearer this time. And then, about 30 seconds after the whistle, Officer Holloway's radio crackled, and a voice came through it that said, "I'm up here. I'm okay. I'm just above the drainage." The voice was Kevin's. I'd listened to his hiking partner describe Kevin's voice for 40 minutes during the briefing. I'd heard his voicemail on the partner's phone. The voice on Holloway's radio was Kevin's voice, produced through official NPS radio equipment on the Ranger's frequency, which is not a frequency a civilian hiker would have access to. Holloway looked at his radio like it had done something personally offensive. Andrea said, "That's not him." She said it the way someone says a thing they know is true and wish wasn't. We started moving up the drainage anyway, 'cause you have to. You cannot have a signal on a ranger's radio and choose to ignore it. There are liability and professional obligations that override your personal discomfort. We moved up carefully, with Officer Holloway in the lead and Andrea right behind him, the rest of us in single file. The figure was at the top of the drainage. It was standing on a rocky overlook above the stream at the base of a dead chestnut snag, and it was facing downhill toward us. It was wearing the orange SAR volunteer jacket. The jacket that Kevin had borrowed from the county equipment locker 3 years ago and never returned, and that everyone on our team recognized because Kevin wore it on every search. It was there, strained across the shoulders of something that was too large for it, the county logo visible in our headlamp beams. The second set of footprints had led here. I put that together while I was looking at the figure, and the arithmetic of it sat in my stomach like cold water. Officer Holloway called up, "Sir, are you Kevin Marsh?" The figure did not answer immediately. It looked at us, oriented its face toward us, the hat pulled low, the headlamp beams not quite reaching the face at that angle. And then it spoke, and what it said was Kevin's voicemail greeting, not an approximation of it, not a paraphrase. The exact wording in Kevin's exact voice, in the cadence of a recorded message rather than a person speaking spontaneously. "Hey, you've reached Kevin. I'm probably on the mountain. Leave a number, and I'll get back when I'm down." Every word. Then it tilted its head too far to one side, farther than a head tilts when a person is curious, farther than the neck should allow, and it said, in a completely different voice, a voice that wasn't Kevin's or anyone's I recognized, something that might have been a name, though I couldn't catch it clearly. Andrea said, very quietly, "Back down the drainage. Now. Not fast." We backed down the drainage. I watched the figure while we went. It didn't move from the overlook. It stood at the chestnut snag and watched us go with that tilted head and did not follow. When we reached the main trail, Andrea turned us south toward the trailhead at a pace that was professional and controlled, but was not slow. She radioed command post and said we had an unresolved situation at the Forney Creek upper drainage and were returning to regroup. She gave Officer Holloway the GPS coordinates of the overlook. Holloway made a call I didn't fully hear. Kevin was found the following morning at approximately 7:20 a.m. by the second team at the lower end of the Springhouse Branch drainage, about a mile and a half from where the figure had been. He was sitting against a tree, dehydrated, mildly hypothermic, confused about how he'd gotten there. He had no memory of the upper drainage. His jacket, the one he'd been wearing at the trailhead, confirmed in the register photo taken by his hiking partner, was an old blue softshell, not the orange SAR jacket. The orange jacket has not been recovered. It was logged as missing from the county equipment locker sometime between Kevin's checkout of it 3 years prior and the inventory conducted after this incident. The locker log showed no withdrawal record. I have filed my own account with the county SAR coordinator as an addendum to the official incident report. The official report lists the figure as unidentified person of interest, possible unauthorized entry into search area. The report does not describe the voice, the movement of the head, or the jacket. I'm telling you what, the official report does not. If you do search and rescue work in mountain terrain, and you hear your own team's signal patterns coming from a direction where no team member is positioned, stop. Do not verify by moving toward the sound without secondary radio confirmation from the command post. If a voice comes through on official frequencies that you cannot account for, treat it as a false signal. These protocols exist, and they exist for reasons that go beyond radio interference and lost equipment. The thing that stood on that overlook in Kevin's jacket could have led us up into that drainage at night in November at 4,000 feet with bad weather coming in. It knew our signals. It knew Kevin's voice. It knew exactly what it would take to make us move in the direction it wanted us to move. The only reason we didn't is because Andrea has 12 years of experience, and she trusted her instincts over the correct sounds coming from the wrong place. Trust your instincts over correct sounds from wrong places. That is the lesson. Story 8. The elk camp on the divide. My hunting partner hasn't been back to the South San Juan since that October. I know because I asked him last spring if he wanted to do it again, and he said no and changed the subject, and I didn't push it, because the night I'm about to describe is not something either of us is in a hurry to discuss. We drove 8 hours home the morning after it happened, and did not talk for most of those 8 hours, which is unusual for two men who've been hunting together for 9 seasons. There is a specific kind of silence that happens after you've both seen the same impossible thing and are both quietly deciding what you're going to do with it for the rest of your lives. We're still deciding. I need to give you some context for this because the context matters. The South San Juan Wilderness in the Rio Grande National Forest in southern Colorado is some of the most remote elk country in the lower 48 states. It sits in the southern end of the San Juan Mountains, a high country of spruce and fir and aspen above 10,000 feet, dissected by deep drainages and open parks that hold elk through the early archery and rifle seasons before the weather pushes them to lower ground. Getting into the good country requires a significant approach. My partner and I'll call him Eli, have been backpacking into a spot we found 8 years ago that involves a 7-mile hike with full pack to a basin at 11,200 feet. The basin holds a spring that runs year-round, open timber on the north-facing slopes for bedding cover, and a series of south-facing parks below the ridgeline that the elk use for early morning and late afternoon feeding. It is a good place. We have killed elk there 4 times. Before that October, we thought we knew it completely. The hike in was on a Monday, the second week of the second rifle season, which puts it in mid-October. The weather on arrival was clear and cold. Overnight lows in the low 20s, daytime temperatures climbing into the low 30s. A hard frost the night before our arrival had put a stiff rime on everything, and the aspen leaves were gone. The timber was stripped down to branch and trunk, which we preferred because visibility through the aspens opened up considerably, and you could glass into the basin from the ridgeline without the screening that summer and early fall provided. We made camp in a spot we'd used 4 times before, a flat area in the timber at the edge of the spring meadow, with a fire ring we'd built with rocks over multiple seasons. We set up the tent, organized the camp, put up the food cache on a bear hang between 2 large spruce, about 60 meters from the tent. We'd killed killed a cow elk on the second day of the previous visit to this basin and had processed her in a clearing about 200 meters north. We always used the same clearing for this work because it was accessible, and the ravens always cleaned up the gut pile within 24 hours, which we preferred. On the evening of the first day, I went to that clearing to check conditions and found the gut pile from that previous season was gone. This was not remarkable in itself. A year and a half of weather and scavenging clears gut pile evidence completely. What was remarkable was what I found instead. The gut pile from an elk that Eli had killed 2 days before we'd hiked in. We'd killed it close to the access road on a scouting day and processed it in the clearing. As a matter of habit, that gut pile was also gone. We'd left it there 48 hours earlier. Fresh gut pile in a wilderness basin 8 miles from the nearest access road, and it was gone. Not scattered, not picked apart, gone. Removed. The ground at the site was undisturbed. No drag marks, no bird activity around the edges. The gut pile, which weighed perhaps 60 pounds, had been removed from the clearing without leaving visible evidence of how. I stood in that clearing for several minutes and tried to construct an explanation. Bears are the standard one. A bear in this country in mid-October would be hyperphagia, feeding intensively before denning, and would consume an available gut pile aggressively. But bear feeding leaves evidence: overturned ground, scat, claw marks, scattered stomach contents. This clearing showed none of that. And a bear consuming 60 pounds of gut pile and producing no waste or mess is not bear behavior I have ever observed or read a credible account of. I went back to camp and told Eli. He said, This is Eli's response to most things that don't have immediate solutions. That night we had a fire and ate dinner and talked about the plan for the following morning. Eli is a man I have known for 15 years and hunted with for 9, and I can tell you exactly what he sounds like, telling a story, the cadence, the voice, the habit he has of trailing off at the end of sentences that are building to something obvious, letting the listener finish the thought. We sat at that fire for 2 hours, and when we turned in, I knew Eli's voice for that night the way you know something by complete familiarity. At approximately 2:20 a.m., I heard him. I heard Eli outside the tent, continuing the conversation we'd been having at the fire. Same topic he'd been talking about, whether we should move camp a half-mile north to work a different park the following afternoon, and the voice outside the tent was his mid-sentence, describing the sightlines from the North Park with the same trailing cadence. I lay in my sleeping bag for a moment, thinking he'd gotten up to relieve himself and was talking to himself, which Eli does sometimes. I unzipped the tent and looked out. Eli was in his sleeping bag beside me. I zipped the tent back up and lay still. The voice outside continued for about 45 seconds and then stopped. Eli's sleeping bag moved slightly as he shifted position. He hadn't heard anything. I lay awake for a long time. In the morning, I did not tell Eli what I'd heard. We hunted through the day without incident. Glassed up a small herd in the North Park in the afternoon, but nothing we wanted to shoot, and made camp at dark. After dinner, Eli reviewed the trail camera we'd hung on a tree near the food cache, a standard practice, checking for wildlife activity around camp. The camera had triggered at 2:14 a.m. The image was a single frame, the infrared making everything in the frame a pale silver and black. The frame showed the fire ring, the camp perimeter, and the dark timber beyond. And in the timber, at approximately 40 meters from the fire ring, there was a shape that was upright and tall and standing perfectly still. The camera's detection range is about 15 meters for motion, which means whatever had been at 40 meters had produced enough movement to trigger the sensor. The image was too dark and too distant for detail. Just a standing form in the timber, above the height a standing bear would produce, not shaped like a tree. Eli looked at the image for a long time. I looked at it and thought about the voice at 2:20 a.m., which was 6 minutes after this image. That evening at the fire, Eli heard the bugle. It came from inside the timber at the camp perimeter, close, maybe 60 meters, maybe less. An elk bugle in mid-October rifle season is not impossible, but it's unusual, the rut generally wrapping up by then. Eli cupped his hands and buckled back a standard bull challenge note, something we'd done in archery season with occasional success. Normally, when you call to a bull in timber, the response comes back from the same direction. The bull either answers in place or starts moving towards you, and you hear him in the timber. Branches and deadfall under hooves. The answer came from directly behind us. From the camp perimeter, on the opposite side of the fire from where the initial bugle had originated, something answered Eli's call, but the pitch was wrong. An elk bugle has a very specific structure, a rising squeal and a guttural chuckle at the end. What answered us had the rising structure, but the duration was too long. The pitch climbing past where a bull's bugle goes and staying there, like a recording stretch slightly beyond its natural length. And it was close, less than 40 meters behind us. We both turned. In the firelight, at the edge of the perimeter where the timber started, a figure stood. It stood in a posture that was human upright, weight on both feet, and it was tall, taller than Eli, who was 6'2", and the firelight caught it enough to show that it was not wearing any gear we could identify. It stood at the timber edge, and it bugled again, that wrong stretched sound, and looked at us while it did it. Eli said something I won't repeat here. He said it very quietly. The figure stepped into the camp perimeter. One step, then another, moving toward the fire. It moved with the quality I've come to think of as the wrong kind of careful, not tentative, not uncertain, but deliberate in the way something moves when it is placing each foot with intent, studying the act of walking rather than simply doing it. Eli reached for his rifle. I reached for mine. The figure stopped about 20 meters from the fire. It said Eli's name, in a voice that was not Eli's, but that was constructed from Eli's voice. The cadence was there, the trailing quality at the end of words, but compressed wrong, like a copy made without full information. And then it said what Eli had been saying at the fire 2 nights before, about the North Park and the sightlines, fragments of that conversation stitched together in wrong order. I fired my rifle into the air above it, single shot, the report enormous in the basin, the echo coming back off the ridgeline. The figure moved. Fast, backward, into the timber, covering the distance between us and the tree line in a time that a person cannot cover it in. The timber swallowed it completely, no crashing through brush, no footfall sound, just gone. We did not sleep. We sat at the fire with rifles across our knees until the sky started to gray toward dawn, and then we broke camp by headlamp and were off the mountain by 9 a.m. The game warden who handles that district, a man named Rick, who I'll not name more specifically, looked at the trail camera image when I brought it to him 2 weeks later. He looked at it for a long time, and then he got up and made coffee and came back and looked at it again. He said he had had 3 reports from that drainage in the last 4 seasons, from hunters and 1 wilderness permit holder. He said he was going to send the image to a wildlife biologist he trusted. He called me back 6 weeks later and told me the biologist didn't have an explanation for the figure in the image. He said the image and the report had been entered into a Colorado Parks and Wildlife Incident database under a category he described as Unexplained Contact, Category 4. I asked him what Category 4 meant. He said, it means it's not the first one. If you hunt backcountry and you hear a bugle that doesn't resolve correctly at the end, the pitch holding too long, the structure wrong in a way you can feel before you can explain, do not call back. Break camp before first light. Take the ridgeline trail if you can. Stay out of the timber drainages and get back to the access road. A rifle shot will make it retreat. It will not make it leave. And whatever it collects from listening to you at the fire, your voice, your partner's voice, your conversation, it will use that. Give it as little as possible. Story 9. The ranger station night shift. The incident report I filed that night was reclassified within 48 hours. What I wrote in that report was specific, detailed, time-stamped, and consistent with the physical evidence that was documented at the station the following morning: boot scuffs on the exterior door threshold. A handprint on the west window that forensics quietly noted was not proportioned, like a standard human hand, and a name signed in the visitor log at 11:04 p.m. when the station had been locked and dark, and I was the only person inside. The reclassified version of that report describes equipment malfunction and possible intruder, human origin unconfirmed. I'm going to tell you what I wrote before they changed it. I took a seasonal ranger posting at the Flathead National Forest Boundary Station in northwest Montana in my second year working for the National Park and Forest Service. It was a small station, a main building that served as office, radio room, and visitor contact point, a small attached equipment shed, a generator enclosure, and a parking area. The station sat on a secondary access road about 8 miles from the nearest small town and about 15 miles from the Glacier National Park boundary. It was the kind of posting that experienced rangers sometimes requested as a quiet assignment, and that new rangers sometimes found themselves assigned to as a first solo posting. I was the second category. The station's primary function in the shoulder season, which is what November is in this part of Montana, was trail closure enforcement, permit verification, and incident documentation. The summer backcountry traffic was long gone by November. What remained were hunters on adjacent private land, the occasional late-season hiker, and the administrative work of closing out the season's records. It was quiet work, which I was grateful for. I was the only person posted to this station. The next occupied ranger station was 40 minutes by vehicle. I had radio contact with dispatch in Kalispell, a cell phone with intermittent service, and a landline that occasionally worked. I had also been given, on my first day, the station's physical log, a hardbound record going back about 12 years, with daily entries from every ranger who had staffed the station. I had read through about 3 years of that log in idle moments, and it was predictably dull. Season closures, permit counts, weather observations, the occasional bear sighting notation, bureaucratic record keeping. I kept reading it the way you keep doing something that gives you the impression of productivity when you'd otherwise just be sitting in an empty building watching the November rain. I did not read the entry from the ranger before me, a man named Greg Parson, who had held this posting for 4 years before his retirement the previous spring with particular attention until the night I'm about to describe. After that night, I read it with very particular attention, but I'll come to that. The night was a Friday in mid-November. Temperature outside was about 18 degrees Fahrenheit, with a wind making it feel considerably colder. The precipitation had been light snow off and on since midday. By 7 p.m. the access road was accumulating, and by 10 p.m. driving conditions on it were marginal. I was not expecting visitors. At 10:58 p.m. I was at the desk doing end-of-season permit reconciliation, and I heard a vehicle on the access road. It pulled into the parking area, and the headlights swept across the station windows and then went dark. I heard a door close. I heard footsteps on the porch, standard booted footstep, snow compressing under weight. And then the footsteps stopped, and nothing happened. When someone comes to a ranger station after hours, there's a protocol sequence. Footsteps, then the after hours button, which rings a chime inside the building and illuminates an after hours contact light, then waiting. None of that happened, just footsteps to the porch and then nothing. I went to the window that overlooks the porch and looked through. The exterior light I'd left on showed the porch surface snow tracked from the parking area, one set of footprints leading to the door, no one standing there. I looked at the parking area through the adjacent window. No vehicle. The headlights I'd seen, the door sound I'd heard, nothing in the lot. I went back to the desk and sat for a moment and thought about what I'd seen and heard and whether I was tired enough to have manufactured it. I looked at the visitor log on the counter to my left. There was a new entry. The visitor log was a standard sign-in sheet on a clipboard, the kind of form that asks for a name, a visit purpose, and a signature, that I placed on the exterior counter during open hours and brought inside at close. It had been inside since 5 p.m. I had not touched it since bringing it in. I had been at my desk for the last 3 hours with a clear line of sight to the log. The new entry was in the name field only, no visit purpose, no signature. The name written there was Greg Parson. In handwriting, I could not compare to anything because Greg Parson had retired to a town in Idaho, and I did not have samples of his handwriting on file. Greg Parson, who had held this posting for 4 years, whose last entry in the station log was from the previous April. I picked up the radio and called Kalispell Dispatch. I told them I'd had what appeared to be an unauthorized entry, that a name had appeared in my visitor log, and that I was requesting guidance. The dispatcher told me to document it, ensure all doors were secured, and that she'd note it in the incident log. She asked if I felt safe, and I said yes, mostly because saying no felt premature. I secured the door I'd been sitting nearest, confirmed the rear door was locked, confirmed the equipment shed access was locked, all secure. I sat back at the desk. At 11:22 p.m., the motion light on the equipment shed exterior triggered. I have a small monitor at the desk that shows the exterior camera feeds. There are 3, one for each exterior wall with coverage. The shed camera feed showed the light on, the shed door illuminated, and a figure standing beside the shed wall in NPS Ranger uniform. The uniform was correct: the flat-brimmed hat, the dark jacket with the agency patches, the badge. The figure was standing with its back to the camera, facing the shed wall. It turned. The face in the camera feed was in partial shadow from the hat brim. I could see the lower face, the jaw, the mouth, the chin. What I registered in the camera quality and the motion light's harsh illumination was that the lower face was proportioned wrong in a way that I couldn't immediately classify. The jaw was too long. Not dramatically, not monstrously, just wrong, by the amount that makes something deeply uncomfortable rather than obviously alien. It looked at the camera. I don't know how it could see the camera's position from that angle in those light conditions, but it oriented its face toward the lens and held there. Then it walked to the station building. I tracked it on the cameras as it moved from the shed to the west wall where the window is. I moved away from the window before it got there. I sat in the center of the main room and held the radio and did not approach any exterior wall. At the west window, through the glass, I heard it speak. The voice was flat and slightly formal, the delivery of someone who has learned speech rather than grown up with it. It said my name, my full name, first and last, which was posted on the station door signage but was not something I'd said aloud to anyone since arriving for my shift. Then it said, "I'm Greg Parson. I need to collect some personal items I left in the equipment shed." Greg Parson. The name from the visitor log. The retired ranger. 4 years at this posting. I sat in the center of the room and did not respond. It tried the window, not violently, not destructively, just the deliberate test of a latch. The window held. It moved to the door. I heard the sound of a key inserted into the exterior lock, a key that should not exist, as the locks had been rekeyed at the start of my posting. The key did not turn the lock. I heard it tried twice, carefully, then withdrawn. It spoke again at the door. Still the formal flat delivery, still my name, still the story about personal items. Then it said Greg Parsons' retirement date to the day, which was information I did not have memorized and which was accurate, I later confirmed. Then it said, "I left something in the bottom drawer of the desk. You can bring it to me. You don't have to open the door." I looked at the desk. There was a bottom drawer I'd never opened because it had been locked when I arrived and I hadn't found a key for it. I did not go to the desk. At 12:07 a.m., the station's interior lights went out completely. The generator had cut. I was in total darkness except for the screen glow of my laptop and the red standby light on the radio. I sat in the center of the room and did not move. The radio thankfully ran on its own battery backup. I keyed it and told dispatch my generator had cut and I was requesting a welfare check. The dispatcher said the nearest unit was 35 minutes away and she'd dispatch them now. Through the darkness and the window, I could see the exterior motion light still on at the shed. The figure had not moved from the door area. From the west side of the building, I heard it speaking, lower now, not to me specifically, just speaking. And what it was saying was a description of the station's interior, the desk layout, the filing cabinet, the equipment on the shelves accurate in detail, the kind of detail that comes from having spent time in a space. At 12:49 a.m., the deputy and a Forest Service law enforcement officer arrived. Their headlights came up the access road and swept across the station, and I watched on the camera feed as the figure at the west wall simply withdrew. Not running, not fast, just steadily moving toward the tree line on the north side of the clearing, and then into the timber, and then gone. I met them at the door. The deputy walked the perimeter with a flashlight. He found the boot marks in the snow at the west window, and at the door he photographed them. He found the handprint on the west window glass, exterior, which he also photographed. He looked at the visitor log entry. He did not comment on any of it while I was watching, but he wrote for a long time in his own notebook. The following morning I looked for Greg Parsons' information in the station's administrative files. I found his retirement paperwork. I found the date he had retired, which matched the date the figure had cited. I found in the station log his last entry in April routine. And I found 2 entries before that, a note in a different hand that said only, G. Parson, do not open door to anyone claiming to be previous staff after close of business. See Incident File OH-9-MAR. Incident File OH-9-MAR was not in any filing cabinet I had access to. Greg Parson died in June, 2 months after his retirement, of a cardiac event. I found this in the local newspaper archive online that night, after the deputy left. The figure at my door had cited a retirement date. It had never mentioned a death date. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it wanted in that bottom drawer, and I made sure I was transferred before the spring posting, so I never had to find out. The report was reclassified. I told you that at the start. What I want you to take from this is simple. If you work a remote station and someone produces a name, a date, an interior detail that they should not have access to, those things are not proof that the person is who they claim to be. They're proof that whatever it is has been watching long enough to learn. Do not engage through the door. Do not offer to retrieve anything. Do not tell it anything it doesn't already know. Keep the lights on and wait for backup. And if someone in a uniform can't produce their badge number immediately and without hesitation, do not open the door. Do not open the door. Story 10, The Ice Road. When it knocked on the passenger window, I turned and looked, and I was looking at my own face. My jacket, my hat, my thermos that I had been drinking from 40 minutes earlier, all of it, on something that was standing outside my truck on a frozen lake road in February in minus 22-degree air and smiling at me with my own mouth. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and my foot on the brake, and I looked at my own face outside my passenger window for what felt like a very long time. Then I looked at its hands. The hands were wrong. I can't fully explain how the fingers were the right length, the knuckles were there, but the hands were wrong, the way the furniture in a dream is wrong, correct in every detail and entirely impossible. I put the truck in drive. I need to be clear that the footage from my dashcam is real and is currently sitting in an evidence bag in the Cook County Sheriff's Office in Grand Marais, Minnesota. A deputy named Michael Anderson took my statement and took possession of the SD card from my dashcam on a Thursday morning in February, and he told me in very clear terms that I should not discuss the contents publicly while the file was under review. I was told this 2 years ago. The review, as far as I know, has not produced a formal finding. I'm talking about it anyway because the official explanation, optical phenomenon caused by atmospheric refraction in extreme cold, does not explain the handprint. It does not explain the depression in the passenger door exterior. And it does not explain the fact that the face on the other side of my passenger window was mine. I have driven ice roads and wilderness access routes in the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness region of northern Minnesota for 15 years. I started as a wilderness guide and shifted into winter supply runs when a fishing camp outside Ely contracted me to deliver fuel and provisions through the winter, using the network of logging roads and frozen lake surfaces that become passable in February when the ice is thick enough. The route I drove that morning, I'll call it the Fernburg Corridor because that's close enough, was a combination of plowed county road, unplowed logging track, and about 4 miles of lake surface that served as the most direct line between the county road system and the fishing camp. The camp itself was accessible by float plane in summer and by ice road in winter. In February, with 2+ feet of good lake ice and the temperature sitting at minus 22 Fahrenheit, the ice surface was easily capable of supporting my 3/4-ton pickup loaded with about 1,000 pounds of fuel cans, food, and equipment. I'd made this specific run 11 times in 2 winters. I knew every turn. I left my house at 5:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, February. This specific date I'm not going to put in this account because I don't want to make it easier for anyone to pull the original report and connect it to my name. The temperature was minus 22 and falling. The sky was clear and fully dark, and there was no wind, which was the best possible condition for this drive. Wind on an ice road in February in Minnesota is your enemy. It drifts the snow marker flags, reduces visibility, and makes it impossible to hear the sounds the ice makes beneath you that tell you things you need to know. The first 20 miles of the route was county road and logging track, plowed and familiar. I made good time. At approximately 6:45 a.m. I reached the lake access point, a cleared launch ramp where the road surface extended out onto the lake ice and transitioned onto the lake surface. The lake ice in February at this spot was confirmed at 31 inches, well within the weight tolerance for my loaded truck. I checked the monitoring station report the previous evening. I drove out onto the surface and got oriented toward the fishing camp 4 miles north and started across. At approximately 6:53 a.m., my headlights picked up fresh tracks crossing the ice road at a perpendicular angle, heading east to west. I slowed and looked at them through the windshield as I passed over them. They were bipedal 2-point human foot configuration, clear impression in the wind-packed surface snow. But the depth of each impression in what is, in February, a very hard-packed snow surface was significant. I'd estimate 3 to 4 inches of impression in snow that my own boot, at 200 pounds with gear, pushes about 1.5 inches into. And the stride length was measured by my truck's wheelbase as I crossed each impression was approximately 6 feet apart. 6-foot stride, 3 to 4 inch impression depth, bipedal, in the dark, in minus 22, on a lake 4 miles from the nearest plowed road. I drove on. At 7:03 a.m., my headlights showed the first marker flag had been moved. The ice road is marked with orange flags on metal stakes, driven into the ice at 50-meter intervals, alternating sides, to keep drivers on the established roadbed and away from pressure cracks and thin ice areas. I had helped establish this flag line at the start of the season. I knew where each flag should be. The flag at what I estimated was the halfway point, roughly 2 miles out, had been moved approximately 15 meters to the north of its correct position. 15 meters north, on this particular stretch, is a known pressure ridge zone. The ice over a pressure ridge is thinner than on either side of it. The published ice road guidance for this route, which I had a copy of in my truck, specifically marked that zone as no vehicle. A driver following a displaced flag in the dark, trusting the flag line, would drive directly into thin ice. The flag had been moved to direct me into thin ice. I stopped the truck and sat for a moment with the engine running and looked at the displaced flag in my headlights. Then I looked at the 2 flags I could see behind me and confirmed they were still in correct position. Then I looked ahead at the next flag, which I could barely make out at the edge of my headlight range. That flag was also in the wrong position. I put the truck in reverse and backed up to reestablish my bearings and took a compass heading toward the camp. I had a paper chart of the lake with the roadbed marked on it, which I'd drawn from the season's flag placement survey. I used the chart and compass to navigate around the displaced flag zone and back onto the established roadbed, adding about a 1/4 mile to my route, but staying on confirmed ice. At 7:17 a.m., the figure appeared in my headlights. It was standing in the road, on the ice, in the center of the established track, approximately 200 meters ahead, standing still, facing my headlights. In my 15 years of driving this corridor, I have stopped for moose on the ice road twice and nothing else. A person standing on a frozen lake at 7 in the morning in minus 22 has either a very serious emergency or a very serious problem. I drove toward it at reduced speed. It did not move. At approximately 50 meters, I could see it clearly in my high beams. Dark jacket, hat I recognized, thermos I recognized, the green Stanley I'd filled at home and was sitting in my cup holder. The figure looked like me. From 50 meters, in headlights, it looked like me. I stopped the truck. I sat for a long time without doing anything. The figure stood in the road and did not move, and did not react to the headlights. I said, aloud, to no one, "Okay." Then I put the truck in drive, kept the wheel straight, and accelerated. The figure did not move as I drove toward it. At about 20 meters, I had enough detail to see the face. Clearly, my face, my actual face, not approximated but reproduced, and then I was at it and I went through it. There was no impact. The truck didn't jolt. My mirror showed nothing in the road behind me. I kept driving at highway speed. The knock came at 7:23 a.m. The passenger window, 2 knocks, spaced like a person knocking on a door. I looked to my right. The face in the passenger window was mine, keeping pace with the truck, which was moving at 40 miles per hour on ice. The face was close to the glass, expressionless. My hat, my jacket, my thermos, in the hand that wasn't gripping, what I realized, with a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature, was the door handle. I put the truck in full acceleration. The loaded truck on ice does not accelerate quickly, but it accelerates. And I watched the speedometer climb 45, 50, 52. And I looked in the passenger mirror, and for a long moment the figure kept pace, running alongside a truck moving at 52 miles per hour on ice, matching speed stride for stride. Then it fell back. In the mirror I watched it slow and slow further, and stop in the road behind me, and I drove until I could see the fishing camp lights on the shore ahead of me, and I drove directly to them. The camp caretaker, a man named Bert, who had been running that camp for 23 years, helped me unload. He did not ask why I looked the way I looked. When we were done, he made coffee and set it in front of me and went back to work without a word, which is the Minnesota way of saying he understood something had happened and wasn't going to push. On the passenger door exterior, after the sun came up, I found the handprint. It was at window height, where something outside a moving vehicle had gripped the door edge, and the metal was deformed inward, not dramatically, but verifiably. The metal of a truck door exterior is not easy to deform with a hand grip. I photographed it before I drove home. I reported everything to the Cook County Sheriff's Office on Thursday. Deputy Anderson took my SD card and my statement. 2 weeks later, he called me and said the footage had been flagged and the file was under review and I should not discuss the contents. That was 2 years ago. On remote ice roads in February, if your headlights show a person standing still in the road in -20 temperatures, do not stop. Do not roll the window down. Do not make eye contact if you can help it. Drive directly through. Whatever appears to be standing in the road ahead of you on a frozen lake in February is not a person in distress. There is no good reason for it to be there. If something knocks on your passenger window while you're moving, accelerate. Keep your eyes on the road. Do not look directly at it. Drive toward any light source you can identify, camp lights, a building, a highway. It did not follow me to the camp. I don't know if the light stopped it or the people stopped it or something else stopped it, but it stopped. Keep driving until you reach the light.